Johnny Depp has never been one to shy away from his past, no matter how dark or painful it may be. Throughout his turbulent life, marked by heartbreak, addiction, fame, and controversy, there has always been a recurring anchor in his personal narrative: the profound, haunting, and at times redemptive influence of his mother, Betty Sue Palmer. For Johnny, her words were more than just comforting maternal guidance. They were lifelines, sharp reminders of resilience, and ultimately, the spiritual compass that brought him back from the edge more than once. "My mom's words saved me," he once said in an emotional interview, a confession that resonated deeper than any publicist-approved quote. Those words echo a story that is less about the Hollywood icon we see on screen, and more about the broken child, the healing man, and the journey in between. Growing up in Owensboro, Kentucky, Johnny experienced a childhood that was far from idyllic. Poverty loomed large in the Depp household, and emotional turbulence was a daily occurrence. His parents fought bitterly, and his father eventually walked out when Johnny was just 15 years old. Left to cope with the aftermath, he found solace in the chaotic but fiercely loyal presence of his mother. Betty Sue, a waitress who had endured her own share of hardship, was not a soft-spoken maternal archetype. She was tough, sharp-tongued, and resilient in ways that etched themselves into Johnny's psyche. Her advice, often wrapped in sarcasm and coated with the grit of survival, became gospel to him. Though their relationship was complex, sometimes even toxic, there was an undeniable love between them, one that would transcend decades and shape Depp's decisions long after she was gone. Betty Sue had a way of saying things that burned themselves into Johnny's memory. In his darkest hours, these words would rise uninvited but welcomed, like an internal dialogue guiding him toward clarity. One of the most pivotal moments came during his teenage years, after his father left and the family was falling apart. Johnny spiraled, smoking, drinking, skipping school, playing in garage bands, and chasing any escape he could find. He recalled his mother pulling him aside during one of his more reckless phases and saying, "You're going to be somebody someday. Maybe not in the way you expect, but you've got something in you. Don't kill it." At the time, those words didn't mean much, but years later they would become his personal mantra, repeating in his head when the weight of fame, addiction, and public scrutiny nearly crushed him. When Johnny dropped out of high school at 16 to pursue music, his mother didn't berate him. Instead, she told him, "If you're going to do it, then be the best at it. Don't waste your pain." This seemingly contradictory mix of tough love and unflinching belief defined their bond. She was the kind of woman who would insult you in one breath and defend you to death in the next. But for Johnny, those contradictions made sense. They mirrored the contradictions within himself, his desire to be free and yet deeply loved, his urge to rebel and yet be understood. Betty Sue's words gave him permission to be flawed, messy, and human. As his acting career began to gain traction in the 1980s, first with the TV show 21 Jump Street, and later with breakout roles in Edward Scissorhands and What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Johnny carried his mother's voice with him. He said that her lessons, phrases like "never trust a smiling man in a suit" or "always know the exit," were not just homespun wisdom, but survival tactics. Hollywood was a land of illusion, filled with people who would build you up, just to tear you down. In that world, Betty Sue's grounded and often brutal realism became his emotional armor, but her influence wasn't just philosophical. When Johnny first bought a house in Hollywood, the first thing he did was move Betty Sue in. She lived with him for years, and their bond only deepened as he matured. When he was on film sets, he would often call her for advice, not about acting, but about life. "What would you do, Mom?" he would ask. And she always had an answer, often one that involved being true to himself, ignoring the critics, and protecting the people he loved. Still, theirs was not a relationship without tension. Betty Sue could be emotionally volatile, and there were times when their connection was strained. In one revealing interview, Johnny described her as one of the meanest human beings I've ever met, but immediately followed it with, "She was also the funniest, most loving, and the most honest. She was my best friend." That duality haunted him. He carried the scars of her harsh words and actions, but also the strength she instilled in him. When she died in 2016, Johnny was shattered. At her funeral, he broke down while delivering her eulogy, calling her a true survivor, and thanking her for everything, even the pain, because it had shaped who he became. The period following her death was one of the darkest in Johnny's life. It was also the beginning of his highly publicized legal and personal battles with ex-wife Amber Heard. The accusations, the media frenzy, and the court cases stripped him of much of his public image and several of his most high-profile roles. It was a time when, by his own admission, he felt like he had lost everything. But even then, it was his mother's voice that pulled him back from despair. He remembered her saying, "They can take everything from you, but they can't take your name unless you give it to them." That sentence hit him with renewed urgency. He vowed not to let lies define him. He would fight back, not just for his career, but for his identity. Throughout the trials and backlash, Johnny leaned on the strength his mother had drilled into him. He refused to be a victim. He spoke of Betty Sue's ability to walk through storms without flinching, of how she would laugh in the face of adversity and say, "It's just another test. Pass it." Those words became a lifeline as he endured months of court proceedings, media condemnation, and public speculation. In the courtroom, as he testified, the stoicism on his face wasn't just legal strategy, it was a tribute to his mother's teachings. "Keep your head up even when they want you to fall," she had told him, and that's exactly what he did. When he won the defamation case in 2022, many saw it as a victory for justice or celebrity redemption, but for Johnny, it was something more intimate. It was a whisper from beyond the grave, a validation of his mother's words. After the verdict, he released a statement thanking those who stood by him, but close sources revealed that he visited her gravesite shortly afterward. He didn't need applause. He needed closure. He stood at her grave, and according to those close to him, whispered, "You were right, Mom. I didn't let them take me." Even now, years after her passing, Johnny keeps her spirit alive in subtle ways. He has her name tattooed on his arm in a heart, a tribute to the woman who gave him life and the tools to survive it. He wears rings that belong to her, quotes her in interviews and references her teachings in the roles he chooses. Whether he's playing an eccentric pirate or a brooding outsider, there's always a trace of Betty Sue in his performance. She taught him to observe people deeply, to find the pain behind their smiles, to give dignity to the broken and the odd. These lessons have made him not just a better actor, but a more empathetic human being. In many ways, Johnny Depp's career has mirrored his mother's essence, unpredictable, resilient, defiant, and unapologetically real. He has made mistakes, stumbled through scandals, and wrestled with addiction. But through it all, he has clung to the words that once pulled him from the abyss. "You've got something in you. Don't kill it." Those words didn't just save him. They continued to guide him. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Johnny's greatest act of rebellion may be his loyalty to his mother's memory, to his flawed humanity, and to the quiet strength she instilled in him. As he enters the later chapters of his life, Johnny has become more reflective. He spends more time painting, writing music, and connecting with his children. He has spoken about how fatherhood changed him, but also how he tries to pass on the wisdom his mother gave him, filtered through his own evolution. To his daughter, Lily Rose, and his son, Jack, he doesn't preach, but he shares. He tells them, as his mother told him, "You don't have to be perfect, just don't give up on yourself." These generational echoes are his way of keeping Betty Sue alive, not just in his heart, but in the lives of those who come after him. The irony is that the world remembers Johnny Depp for his roles, the Mad Hatters, the troubled romantics, the misunderstood anti-heroes. But those who know him best understand that his greatest performance has been off-screen, surviving the chaos of fame, the brutality of public judgment, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the loss of the one person who believed in him before the world ever knew his name. It's a story that doesn't end with a box office hit or a courtroom victory, but with a son remembering his mother's voice in the silence between moments. A voice that once said, "They'll try to break you, but they won't win, unless you forget who you are." And he hasn't forgotten. Not when the cameras shut off, not when the headlines fade, not when he walks through a crowd of adoring fans with a smile that hides 100 wounds. Because in his mind, in the marrow of his being, her words remain, fierce, unfiltered, and forever his salvation. Long after the applause has died down and the world has shifted its attention to newer faces and fresher scandals, Johnny Depp continues to carry the quiet weight of his past with the same steadiness he once used to shoulder fame. To the outside world, he may seem like a man comfortably swathed in scarves, jewelry, and the mystique of rock and roll Hollywood glamour, but beneath that exterior lies a core shaped by struggle, loss, and the indelible presence of a mother whose voice still reverberates through every major decision he makes. The truth is, Johnny's relationship with fame has always been complicated. Unlike many in his industry, he never chased the spotlight for validation. Acting was never about the red carpets or the magazine covers. It was about survival. It was about expression. It was about finding a place in the world where he could be someone else, because being himself hurt too much at times. But even when cloaked in character, even when his face was hidden behind prosthetics or elaborate makeup, the voice that grounded him, that echoed in his subconscious like a sacred chant, was that of Betty Sue Palmer. Her sharp wit, her brutal honesty, her take-no-prisoners attitude, these things didn't fade as his star rose. They grew louder. They became his internal dialogue. He can still recall entire conversations with her, word for word. Moments when he was teetering on the edge, unsure of what move to make next. It was her voice that guided him back. Even now, in the solitude of a hotel room after a long day of interviews or during quiet nights on set when the cameras stop rolling, he sometimes catches himself repeating her phrases aloud, like incantations meant to shield him from the chaos. Outside, "Never give them your soul. Let them think they've won, until they haven't. The ones who shout the loudest are usually the ones most afraid." These weren't lessons from a textbook or a self-help manual. They were survival tools passed down by a woman who had lived through her own wars and emerged, if not unscathed, then undeniably unbroken. He remembers her laughter, the way it could fill a room and chase away even the worst moods. It wasn't sweet or girlish. It was rough, throaty, and defiant, like someone who had laughed in the face of the world and dared it to try again. When Johnny thinks of resilience, he doesn't think of motivational quotes or dramatic movie montages. He thinks of his mother, lighting a cigarette after a long shift at the diner, sitting on their porch and telling him with a crooked smile, "They'll never know how much you're carrying unless you show them, and don't you dare show them." That lesson, above all, stuck with him. Through the trials, both literal and figurative, that came later in life, Johnny bore his pain with a stoicism that confused many, but made perfect sense to those who knew his mother. She had taught him to bleed quietly, to protect his vulnerability, like a sacred secret. When Amber Heard's allegations turned his life upside down, when he was vilified in the press and abandoned by powerful studios, it would have been easy to crumble, to lash out, to surrender. But he didn't. He endured, because Betty Sue would have demanded nothing less. Her words weren't just memories, they were a blueprint for resilience, and Johnny followed them with the reverence of a disciple. There's a particular memory that often comes to him in times of quiet, one that he's never fully shared with the public. He was about 21 on the cusp of fame, uncertain and riddled with anxiety. He called his mother late at night, worried about whether he was good enough, whether he had what it took. She didn't offer false comfort or platitudes. She simply said, "Baby, if they can't see it, that's their problem, not yours. You just keep walking. Don't look back unless it's to see how far you've come." It's a line he's returned to over and over again, especially in the last decade, as his career and reputation were put through the ringer. That line has become a mantra not only for survival, but for transformation. In the years since her passing, Johnny has made efforts to reconnect with the parts of himself he once abandoned for the sake of public image or romantic entanglements. He's returned to music, to painting, to writing poetry, things he once shared only with her. These are the ways he keeps her close, not as a ghost of the past, but as an active force in his creative and emotional world. Every lyric he pens, every canvas he brushes with color carries a trace of her influence. He creates not just to express, but to honor, to ensure that her voice, sharp, proud, unwavering, is never silenced by time or memory. He's also grown more reflective in recent years, finding joy in the small things his younger self might have overlooked. A cup of tea on a rainy day, a handwritten letter from his daughter, the sound of his son's laughter echoing through a quiet house. And in each of those moments, she's there. Not in body, but in essence. She's the reason he takes none of it for granted, the reason he knows how fragile and sacred peace can be. To the world, Johnny Depp may always be the eccentric genius, the misunderstood artist, the man caught in a whirlwind of fame and scandal. But to himself, he is still that boy from Kentucky, sitting on a porch beside his mother, learning how to armor his soul with words. Words that weren't always pretty or gentle, but were always true. And those words, the ones she left behind, didn't just shape the man he became. They saved him. They saved him from forgetting who he was during the storm. They saved him from giving in to bitterness. They saved him from the kind of quiet self-destruction that fame often cloaks in glamour. And most of all, they saved him from losing the part of himself that believed in love, in art, and in the idea that no matter how lost one feels, they can always come home. To the memory of a mother who never stopped believing in her son, even when the world tried to erase him.